Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special interview edition of Monday Match Analysis. I'm Gill Gross. Today on the program, you can hear me, but you cannot see me. That is due to my recording technologies. I can do these interviews, but not while I'm on camera. I'm working on changing that at some point. But a very exciting guest. It is Giri Nathan. Now, full disclosure, this interview was recorded on Tuesday, but I decided to wait until Wednesday morning to post it. And there has been a change in that Giri has announced a new job with the Racquet magazine. So at this point, he clearly didn't want to give me the scoop, which I totally understand. When you're negotiating for a new job, you don't want to put anything out there in case something goes wrong at the last minute. And, you don't want to mess up any kind of negotiation. So he didn't let me in on that. But this morning he has announced that he will be working with the Racquet magazine. So that's exciting news for him. But I think you'll enjoy this discussion. We talk about the young guys first because that's what the ATP finals seem to be all about. Then we got into a little bit of Big-3 talk. And then at the end we talked about what happened at Deadspin. So I think you'll enjoy this. Without further ado, Giri Nathan. Giri, you're now on a very short list of people who I've reached out to come on the show. So I thank you for joining me here on Monday Match Analysis.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a couple of weeks since the events transpired at Deadspin, where you and a lot of your coworkers quit, and I'll loop back to that a little bit later in the show. I want to ask you about what went down at Deadspin towards the end. But first of all, how are you doing after these last couple weeks?
Yeah, it's definitely been a bizarre couple of weeks. Obviously, stuff at Deadspin ended in a pretty dramatic fashion, and I think we all needed a couple days to just decompress and get back to normal. And now we're all starting to pick up a little bit of freelance work. So for me, tennis, I don't yet have a permanent home for tennis writings, but I did my first freelance piece today up at Inside Hook, and it was fun to get back into the rhythm of things. I'd also kind of, to be honest, lost track of the ATP and WTA for a few weeks as work chaos sort of picked up. But this past week, it was nice to be able to closely watch the ATP finals and find some things to say about it. But
right.
Yeah, sort of nice to be in some normal tennis viewing rhythm again.
Yeah, the ATP finals provided a nice return to normalcy shortly, and it was good to see you get your writing up. You can find that piece on InsideHook.com. It's titled "The Future of Men's Tennis is Finally, Hopefully, Probably Here." And one of the big themes of that, and I think you said it really well right off the top, there's been a lot of false starts in the past. I mean, you can go as far back as Grigor Dimitrov and Kei Nishikori and Milos Raonic, where people have kind of pronounced tennis's next big thing, and then it's kind of fell short. But I think this next group feels different to a lot of people. And, Team at 26 is an older guy, but has developed so nicely. It feels different right now from I'd say the early 2000s or 2010s.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I've also, it's been a real pleasure as someone who didn't always believe in Team's potential, to just see how he's grown in the last few years. I think some aspects of his game do remind me of Stan, just thinking about the big cuts to the ball and the incredible power they're able to produce. And I think I could see him having maybe a not too different career trajectory. Definitely see him ending up with a handful of slams, doing very well on clay as he has, and now having success on the hard court as well. So it was nice to have my mind changed. I think a big moment was seeing him go toe-to-toe with Nadal at the Open last year, and just has developed pretty nicely since then.
I totally agree with you on the Wawrinka comparison, and I would go as far to say, and I said it on Monday, that Thiem will probably surpass Wawrinka's accomplishments in his career. He's ahead of where
Yeah,
Wawrinka was at 26, and I think the biggest
for sure.
attribute that Thiem has where Stan was not as strong is just the movement and the legs and the explosivity in terms of defending.
Team is in absolutely incredible shape. We've seen how well he holds up at the end of these sort of marathon matches, and I've really been impressed by that. I just think the fitness is played on a different level than what we've seen from Stan.
For my money, he's the fittest player on tour, and maybe Borna Coric is also in that conversation. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, those guys, and then Diminor is obviously carrying a little less weight, but seems to have incredible speed and stamina too. If I think about sort of the matches he had against Marin Cilic at the Open, that was a great one, and I think we'll see him maybe even as he physically develops more, just be one of the toughest guys to grind past in a long match.
You ended the piece by proclaiming that someone in their 20s will win a slam next year, and it's absurd that we're in a position where no one in their 20s is a Grand Slam champion. But who are you favoring to be that player?
I think at the moment I'd probably say Medvedev. I just think the stretch he sustained towards the end of this season was absolutely absurd. Playing 6 straight finals, figuring out a wide range of opponents. I think he's found a style that really works for him and that frustrates a lot of different opposing play styles. And I could just see him putting it together for 2 weeks on a hard court. I'm not sure whether that'd be Australia necessarily, but I don't see why not. Yeah, he's in great form, even though he did peter out a little bit at the ATP finals. But he's played a lot of tennis, and that's totally understandable.
I agree. That was my takeaway from his 0-4 stretch to end the season was just a total pass on that due to how much tennis he's played. To me, though, it's Thiem in terms of who's most likely to win a Grand Slam next year. I just feel like nobody's close to the Big-3 at Wimbledon, and I think that's a tournament that's it's not gonna it'll go to one of them. And hard court has so much parity, so many contenders, and Thiem is in the mix there. Medvedev certainly also in the mix. But on clay, Thiem is really a Nadal injury away from being the runaway favorite.
Yeah.
So probability-wise.
I think that's right. He really is the only contender on clay, if we're all being honest, non-Nadal division. And I think it's sort of a matter of time and health as to when he finally picks up his first title at the French.
Let's talk.
I think now that we've seen him kind of fully operating on 2 surfaces, I definitely am a bigger believer in his slam chances.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the man who just won the ATP finals, Stefanos Tsitsipas. You wrote a piece for him, a long one, on Deadspin, and the sense I get is that's one of your favorite pieces you've written.
Yeah, I think that's right. It was sort of the first time that I'd gotten to spend a good amount of time with a player and write about that in a leisurely, less sort of quick blog way, and that was a lot of fun. And he's a very interesting personality, as I think a lot of tennis fans have picked up on, and it'll be fun to watch him navigate his life as one of the most famous tennis players in the world. And I think he presents sort of a different personality type than a lot of what we've seen in the past.
You have a very unique perspective on this because a lot of that piece is focused on his use of social media, his vlogging, but also his tweeting and his I don't know if he's as big on Instagram because I'm not as big on Instagram, but he actually took a reprieve from social media, as I'm sure you know, sometime after that. What did you make of Stefanos taking a step back and deciding to put the screens on the back burner?
Yeah, I think he's a pretty reflective person. He's obviously also a very young person, so he's still testing out what works for him. But it seems that at different points in this season, he's had a little bit of mental fatigue and has been trying to clear his head and reset. And get re-engaged with the sport. And I could definitely see, setting the screens aside being a good first step towards doing that. And obviously he did find a way, despite some disappointing slam results towards the end of the year, to pick things back up and play a really, really good tournament last week. It is sort of, we think about tennis as such a sport of single-minded focus where you don't have time for other things, and he obviously does have a lot of other interests outside the sport, so it'll be interesting to see how he balances and manages his time.
Did you get a sense spending time with him that there was a lot of energy and a lot of focus directed towards the outside stuff?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite quotes in the piece is that he admits to me that sometimes he's on court, playing or practicing, and his mind is thinking about the next video he's working on. And I don't think that's going to severely hamper him. He's obviously already had incredible results and will continue to be one of the best young players coming up. But it's just something to think about, and I wouldn't be shocked if he had different moments like this in his career where he sort of had to gather himself and reset his priorities and maybe set aside some of his hobbies at certain times. But in principle, I don't really see why tennis players shouldn't be able to maintain some semblance of a personal life and their own interests and so on. It's just a matter of budgeting.
Right, and I think popularity matters a lot in this sport because a lot of how much money players make is dependent directly on popularity because it leads to endorsement money. Unlike other sports where, Mike Trout in baseball has a multi-million-dollar contract and no one needs to hear him speak ever. I think tennis is a little bit different.
Definitely different. Mike Trout could walk down the street and maybe not even be bothered, and he's still collecting his paycheck. But Stefanos is definitely someone who's aware of, I guess, the value of developing a brand, and I could definitely see him, wanting to sell ads on his videos or just become a public figure. Sometimes when you see him holding the mic at one of these trophy ceremonies, he looks like he's ready to do like a 5-minute stand-up set or something. He's just pacing around and kind of gesturing to the crowd and really relishing the moment in a way that I don't think is completely natural to him, but is sort of charming in its own way.
Yes, awkwardly charming. I would agree with that with that assessment. I feel like you're more tuned in than most to the kind of personalities and the marketing that players do on tour. So outside of Tsitsipas, where do you feel like the other young guys fit in terms of kind of narrative and public perception?
Yeah, I see. So I guess just coming from the last week of play, just looking at some of those personalities, Medvedev, as we've seen, is someone who kind of relishes the troll element, but also had a very sincere side during that U.S. Open run. So I could see him actually doing pretty well in the public spotlight, even though having talked to him personally, I know he's a pretty introverted guy and doesn't necessarily want to be, in the public eye constantly. But there is something genuinely appealing about him. Sasha does not seem to want to have much to do with any of that and likes to keep a low profile. So I think despite seeing the tour try to push him as some kind of charismatic figure, it may not play out as expected. I still think he's going to have a great career and great results, but that aspect may not play out as well. I think in terms of a complete package of someone who's very poised and has the game to back it up and has always been very thoughtful and pressed, I could definitely see Felix Auger-Aliassime being the kind of figure that they want to market the sport. Just a soft-spoken, kind of thoughtful, and like I said, very poised kid who seems like he'll be a really, really good player too. But yeah, it's interesting. Their dream, I'm sure, would be for like Nick Kyrgios to focus and do well because he does have sort of an innate appeal that reaches some viewers outside of the usual fan circles. But I'm sure they're not gambling on that happening. So
yeah, I think that's undeniable. That Kyrgios certainly brings the numbers, and I think Felix I agree with you. Kind of reminds me more of the kind of character that Federer, Djokovic, and Nadal are in
Yes,
terms
for
of
sure. A big
kind
three
of,
type, yeah.
you know, nothing too far out there, and valuing kind of class and respecting the sport to the fullest extent. But there's also nothing
Yeah.
wrong with a villain. And if
Right.
Sasha Zverev is going to play that villain role and embrace that villain role, that can be good for
Yeah,
tennis.
for sure. And I had a thought today, or maybe yesterday, that I'm not too invested in, but I could sort of also see him having playing a Burditch type role where I think the game style is not too far off. They're just both really nice ball strikers. They like to play from the baseline, like big serve, but also just being this somewhat muted presence, always challenging, the charismatic Big-3 players, but never really craving the spotlight himself. I could sort of see some parallels there. But I think you're spot on with the comparison with Felix and the Big-3. Like, to put it simply, you could just see him in a Rolex ad. It requires a very little stretch of the imagination to see that ad.
And speaking of the Big-3, we've kind of spoken around them so far. Where do you see their three-way battle? They're still, again, they finished 1-2-3. They swept all 4 slams. As much as we can get, as much as we like to look ahead to the future and some of the younger guys because it's fun and it's interesting, they're still all just knocking on the door, and the Big-3 are at the top. And that's obviously still a dream scenario for the ATP. But where do you see that in 2020? What's your feel for how that battle plays out between those 3?
I honestly think they'll still get maybe, let's say, 3 of the 4 slams. I think maybe there'll be one opening, but I wouldn't be surprised if they kept this up for, at least another 2 seasons. I don't know what Federer's goals are in terms of, I'm sure he could play at a very high level for a very long time, but he also seems like someone who values his quality of life and maybe just wants to spend time with his family and at some point slow things down. Djokovic, being the youngest of the bunch, could see him doing this for the indefinite future. Nadal, we talk a lot about health being the limiting factor for him, but he's still playing really good tennis at the end of a long season. So who knows? I wouldn't close the book on them, obviously, at any point. And I think if I were, it's sort of a played out conversation, but if we're predicting slam counts, I have Djokovic coming out on top eventually.
Okay. It's interesting because I think we exit 2019 and all 3 of them are on a trajectory that they can be pretty happy with. Federer stepped it up from 2018 in terms of level.
Down year for him.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not that far removed from 2017 where he won 2 slams. So Federer's in a good spot.
And I think the match we saw from him against Djokovic last week was one of the cleanest offensive matches he's played since 2017. I'm not sure he even had a match in 2018 where he looked that good. That the straight sets win over Djokovic was very convincing.
And then you look at Nadal. No one's been better at beating up when healthy on the rest of the tour than Rafa. And the only hurdles that he's struggled with in recent years is Federer and Djokovic. But you can go pretty far even without beating those 2.
Right.
Which obviously he could still turn that around with the level he's at and the offensive tennis he's introducing. And then Djokovic, it's interesting because it almost felt like he could have done more this season, yet he picked up another 2 majors.
Yeah, I agree. It's totally true. He, whenever he is playing, he's playing good enough to play. He's just at an incredible level and has definitely modified his game in intelligent ways to maintain that level as he's aged, and perhaps lost a bit of the just raw speed he used to have to chase down balls. But the way he closes to the net now, his volleying touch, it's all incredible. He just plans the points out as well as anyone I've ever seen.
Before we shift gears to Deadspin, I want to ask, do you even have a take right now on the Davis Cup? Because I wouldn't blame you if you didn't.
I do not. I probably need to spend more time thinking about that, but I know it's something that's in the conversation right now. How about yourself?
Well, I'm kind of in your boat. I need to. There's only been one day, or maybe two. I think just one day of play,
Yeah.
and it's on FS. Right now, my only thoughts are this: it's not good that this is on FS2 for
Yeah.
visibility, because
This
that's
is
in the U.S. That's Fox Sports 2. You go ahead.
it's been one of my biggest complaints about being an American tennis fan is that the broadcasting setup is so fractured, so confusing, and sometimes straight up just lacking. And this is a great example of that. That it makes it hard to stay engaged in the tour outside the majors unless you're really going out of your way. There are huge business incentives and reasons things are the way they are, I'm sure, but it can't be the most constructive way to build a fan culture when people have to go around chasing the programming at different outlets, and that changes from season to season. So it's tough. It's tough, and it's unfortunate that an event that should be fun to follow, like the Davis Cup, has become so hard for American fans to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. And this stuff is important. We saw it when the WTA had exclusive rights with beIN Sports. Am I
Right.
pronouncing that even correctly? Because if I'm not unintentionally, it's proving my point. But
Yeah, that was my guess as well, but we
okay.
could both be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, this is it's exposure is really important, and FS2 is a channel that has less distribution than Tennis Channel, and tennis fans aren't
Yeah.
used to going to it for tennis because nothing is really on there except all of a sudden the
Yeah.
Davis Cup gets slapped onto there.
Yeah, and I think it's just one of those structural obstacles to tennis picking up a place in American pop culture is that there are already amazing personalities and amazing talents. There's no drought in that sense. It's just like make it easier for people to engage with this stuff, make better highlight videos, make sure these players are getting to show off their personalities a little bit, make sure the actual matches are viewable without too much inconvenience.
Well, speaking of media, Deadspin is a popular, and I don't know, that could change, but at least it was a very popular sports blog that you were their tennis writer. And what happened, I'm going to explain it in simple terms, and feel free to amend
Sure.
and add to my brief summary. But essentially, they were bought by a company called Gill Media, and the new CEO, Jim Spanfeller, basically said, all right, everyone, stick to sports, no politics. To which the editor-in-chief at Deadspin, Barry Pachetsky, said, no, that can't really happen. We're not going to do that. And then he was let go. And after Pachetsky was let go, a lot of the writers followed, including yourself.
Yeah, you have the broad strokes right. I'll just make a few little tweaks.
Yep.
So Deadspin was part of a network of sites, formerly way back when called Gawker Media Group, then later Gizmodo Media Group, and most recently Gill Media. So Gill Media was renamed after being acquired by a private equity company called Great Hill Partners. That firm installed a new CEO, Jim Spanfeller, and things kind of went sour from there. He had a very different vision for at least our site than the writers did. And there were a few points of tension. One, definitely, as you mentioned, was the idea that Deadspin should be a more straightforwardly stick to sports kind of site, which is never really been in its DNA. And his management style was very alienating to our staff. He, in effect, forced out our previous editor-in-chief and then our fired our acting editor-in-chief, Barry, and just morale was very, very strained. And at some point, we just saw their vision of the site was something we couldn't really abide by. It wasn't the site we wanted to be a part of. And after Barry's firing, I think the staff collectively realized we were ready to move on, and it was definitely a sad ending to a project we'd all loved working on. But in some ways, I think we were proud to have gone out in solidarity with each other.
So the decision was pretty easy. Is that accurate? Because it was kind of this collective realization?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, it's never an easy decision to quit your job, especially in an industry as unstable as media and digital media. But
Yes.
within a few hours, I think, of Barry being fired, we realized this is sort of a point of no return, and that our management was acting in such bad faith that we couldn't count on them to run the company or manage us in a fair way. So it definitely was a collective decision, and people's individual decisions to quit their jobs soon followed. I think over the course of 3 days, basically the entire site had been emptied of its previous staff. And then it sort of lived on in a zombie form as we suspect one of the people in management has been writing the pieces from an anonymous byline, and then that person resigned as well. And I don't think there's been a new article written on the site in at least 10 days, probably a little more.
Wow. I mean, that is just a very, it's a very sudden turn for a website that had quite a bit of cult following and notoriety. The intersection of sports and politics is a big issue in this in the sports media space right now, and it's gone multiple ways for different organizations. But for Deadspin specifically, why was Stick to Sports so unanimously rejected?
Yeah, I think it's because that's never really been the ethos of the site. If you want to find gamers and sort of straightforward match reporting and athlete profiles and that kind of thing, there are places that do that stuff at a scale that's much bigger than what we can do. You can go to ESPN, you can read the news wires, you can find that stuff, just the straight up who, what, where, why, when. But we always took a sort of different, irreverent, often overtly political, and usually outsider angle to the sports coverage. So asking us to move, and that meant in subject matter as well. So a lot of our writers have interest outside sports, and our site was always a free place to explore those things and to write about other things that captured our attention. And Deadspin has always just been a kind of the sum of the interests of its writers at that given point in time. So to take that away felt like it was removing one of the core elements of the site's identity. And I think that, along with the edict to stick to sports and what we suspected is just a business move that's being made to repackage the site as maybe something more palatable to advertisers, even though I think that's misguided too. We've never had problems selling ads in the past. So I just think there was a lot of incoherent management theory there, and we picked up on that, and we're a little concerned about what the long-term prospects of the site would be if this was going to be our new ownership.
Right. It seemed that the ownership wasn't fully in touch with what they were really taking over in terms of what the property was. For you, what are the next steps?
So I'm currently freelancing. Hope to be announcing a somewhat more regular place for tennis writing soon. But for the time being, it's honestly just picking up some freelance work, thinking about what comes next, and hopefully broadening a little bit beyond my sports coverage as well. But definitely keeping that up, as tennis primarily and also basketball are subjects I love to cover in my writing, and I am eager to do more of that as I keep up my writing career.
And if people want to reach you?
The best way is probably my email. That's GIRINATHAN24 That's GiddyNathan24. And I'm on Twitter at GiddyNathan. So either one of those should be a good way to find me.
All right. Sounds good. Giddy, I appreciate it very much. I didn't know that you were supposed to. We have something in common, which is hard first names to pronounce. Because most people they know me as Gill on here, which is simple enough. But my full name is Gillin. And I get, when people read that, I get Gillin, Gillian. And some people just Guillaume if they think I'm French.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I bet you get like a French style pronunciation as well.
Yeah, I was actually a U.S. Open ball boy, and they thought the people in charge of giving out the assignments thought my name was Guillaume. So essentially, as long as I worked that job, 3 weeks out of the year, I was Guillaume. Because there was no setting to correct a person when they're giving out a bunch of assignments, court assignments,
right,
to hundreds of ball people.
You can think about it as a little study abroad experience. You got to experience what it's like to be French for a couple weeks.
I was abroad in Queens as a French person, and I got for you. I think I got the vowels right. It rhymes with Diddy,
yeah, that's right.
But I just pronounced the R. It should be like a D, not like an R.
That's right. Yeah.
All right.
I think early in my Deadspin career, there's an article explaining how to pronounce my name. It might be somewhere out there, but yeah, it's definitely something it's been always been a conversation starter. As I imagine it has been for you too.
Yes, no doubt. All right. Well, this has been a lot of fun, and
yeah, thanks for having me.
Let's do it again down the road. Thanks so much for coming on.
For sure. Take care.
You too.